The words echoed in the girl's mind, like an ominous melody refusing to fade. Each repetition stirred a painful memory, a fragment of the night that turned everything upside down. She was 18, and this was the story of how her quiet, predictable life ceased to exist. For as long as she could remember, her life had been like the surface of a windless lake, calm, serene, yet perhaps a little monotonous. Her mother had left them years ago. There were no goodbyes, no explanations, just a sudden disappearance, leaving behind a silence that filled every corner of their home. She and her father became inseparable. He was her anchor, holding her steady in a world that had lost all meaning after her mother's departure. Her father was a charming yet reserved man, tall, stately, with dark hair that had begun to weave with silver threads, making him even more appealing. His presence offered a sense of safety and protection. Perhaps that's why, even after so many years without her mother, she never truly felt alone. They had their routines, their quiet conversations that spoke more than any words. But something began to change when she started university. The transition was abrupt. The girl, who had always lived in a sheltered world, surrounded by her father's constant support, suddenly found herself in an entirely new environment. University life was a whirlwind of sounds, colors, and sensations. Studies were challenging, but the people around her were captivating. She remembered the first party she attended, loud music, its pulse reverberating through her body. For the first time, she felt truly alive, as if the girl who had always been protected and cared for had finally taken the reins. But every step she took away from her familiar routine seemed to distance her from her father. He always said he was proud of her, but his eyes told a different story. When she came home for weekends, his joy at seeing her was sincere, yet there was a subtle melancholy in his gaze, a worry he tried to hide but which she felt as if it were her own. One evening, after one of those parties, she returned home later than usual. The door, as always, was unlocked, a sign that she was expected. She found her father in the kitchen, holding a cup of hot tea. His smile was gentle, but she sensed tension in the air. "How was the party?" he asked, trying to sound casual, but his voice carried weight. "Good," she replied, without elaborating, and sat down on the bench. Her father watched her with an intensity that made her uneasy, but she pretended not to notice. There was something different about that night, something in the way he looked at her. Back in her room, the girl felt the silence in the house was deafening. Her father had always been her refuge, her constant, but now there was a distance between them that she didn't know how to bridge. No matter how hard she tried to ignore it, something inside her told her this was just the beginning. The next day, she woke up later than usual. The smell of fresh coffee led her to the kitchen, where her father, as always, sat with an open newspaper in front of him. But this time, his gaze wasn't on the page. He looked at his daughter, his eyes heavy, filled with something she couldn't quite define. "You know you can always talk to me, right?" he said, breaking the silence. "I know," she replied, but something in her voice sounded unconvincing, even to herself. A tension she couldn't explain hung in the air. It felt as though they were walking a fine line, and any misstep could change everything. Weeks followed, filled with moments of silence and polite conversation, but the sense of impending change never left her. She began to notice details that had previously escaped her attention, the way her father looked at her, how his hands, usually firm and steady, sometimes trembled when he touched her. And then came that night, one she would never forget. The echo of her words still resonated in her head, "Dad, this is my first time." It was as if their world had flipped, transforming into something new, unexpected, something she couldn't yet name. But what exactly happened that night? What changed between them? These were questions she still couldn't answer. But one thing she knew for sure, from that moment on, her life would never be the same. After that night, something inside her began to shift. It was an invisible change, a feeling that slowly grew amidst the familiar routine. She and her father continued with their lives, but the dynamic between them had subtly changed. It was as if an invisible barrier had been erected, even as another had crumbled. At university, life still buzzed, classes, parties, new faces, all seemed exciting. Yet, despite all the novelty, every time she returned home, she felt a strange tension in the air. It felt as if an invisible thread tightened during their conversations, glances, and gestures. What would happen next? That particular day was etched in her memory forever. It was a Friday, and the young woman decided to stay home. She felt tired of the university whirlwind and endless parties that always seemed to end the same way, a multitude of unfamiliar faces and deafening music that, truthfully, didn't fill her inner void. Settling comfortably on the living room sofa, she saw her father enter with 2 cups of fragrant tea. He always knew instinctively when she needed solitude. "Thought you might like this," he murmured, handing her a cup and sitting beside her. For several minutes, they enjoyed a comfortable silence. But she felt his gaze on her, reserved, yet intense. For some reason, that gaze made her heart beat faster, though she wouldn't admit it even to herself. Her father began to talk about his day, about work, about minor details that usually slipped past in the daily rush. She listened attentively, yet felt distracted. Something in his voice sounded different, softer, closer. Or perhaps it was she who had changed in that moment. Her best friend's words from university came to mind: sometimes the most important connections in our lives don't follow conventional rules. They just happen. It was a phrase she hadn't fully understood until now, but it suddenly seemed to make sense. As the tea in her hands cooled, she began to reflect on how their relationship had evolved over the years. She remembered all the times he had been there, from small gestures, like making her breakfast before school, to significant moments, such as holding her tight when she first cried over heartbreak. He had always been the pillar of her life. But now, that foundation seemed to be shifting, changing shape, and it made her uneasy. That night, after he had retired to his room, she remained alone in the dark living room. The TV light flickered, but her thoughts were far from the screen. She wondered how strange it was that 2 people could be so close yet so mysterious to each other, forcing them to confront aspects of themselves they never knew existed. The next day, the atmosphere in the house was tense, but not oppressive. They seemed to be aware of the change between them, but neither knew how to approach it. They spent the day in silence, doing household chores. At one point, her father broke the silence. "Lily, are you enjoying university?" he asked in a calm voice, but with a gaze that seemed to penetrate her soul. "Yes," she replied, though her voice sounded uncertain even to herself. "But it's different, everything's new. Sometimes I miss home." He offered a soft smile, but there was something in it she couldn't quite place. "You know, I miss you too. The house feels empty when you're not here." His words struck her in a way she hadn't expected. It wasn't just what he said, but how he said it. There was a weight to his words, an emotion that seemed to have been hidden, waiting for its moment. That night, lying in her room, she began to reflect on how their lives had changed, how her going to university had created a distance between them, yet also a strange closeness. It was as if they were learning to know each other again, but in an entirely different way. The window was open, and a cool night breeze drifted into the room, carrying the distant chirping of crickets. She lay staring at the ceiling, her heart pounding. And for the first time, she admitted to herself that something was happening, something she didn't fully understand but knew she couldn't ignore. Yet she asked herself, how had they come to this? What did it mean? And most importantly, where would it lead them? But there were no easy answers to these questions, because sometimes life puts people in situations that challenge everything they know about themselves, and she was about to find that out the hard way. The following days were filled with silence and inner turmoil. She felt caught in a whirlwind of emotions, unable to distinguish right from wrong, reality from imagination. Her accustomed university routine was crumbling, and at home, she began to notice small details that had previously gone unnoticed. Every gesture, every glance, every word seemed to carry more weight than they should. One afternoon, after particularly tiring classes, she decided to return home earlier than usual. The semester was in full swing, and the routine was starting to wear on her. The sound of the front door closing echoed through the house, and as she entered the living room, she saw her father engrossed in work on his laptop. He hadn't expected her at that time, which was evident from his surprised look, but there was also an inexplicable glow in his eyes. "Lily, you're home early today," he said, closing his laptop. "Is something wrong?" "No, I'm just tired today." "Decided to come home," she replied, sitting next to him. And the silence that usually surrounded them now had a different texture, as if it were filled with unspoken words. He looked at her, and for a moment, she felt something profound emerge between them. It was hard to explain, but it felt as though their minds had connected in a way that transcended the ordinary. The silence was broken by his frank confession, "Lily, I miss you." This sudden outburst caught her off guard. Her father, who had always seemed an unshakable rock and the family's pillar, suddenly showed such touching vulnerability that it resonated deeply within her. She fell silent, trying to find appropriate words to respond. "It's not that," she began, but her voice sounded uncertain. "It's just that everything's different now." University. The sentence remained unfinished. In her father's gaze, there was softness and understanding, as if he were saying, "I perfectly understand what you're trying to say, even if you find it hard to express." It was at this moment that the girl realized changes were brewing. They both seemed to be dancing around a certain truth that neither dared to voice. But what was this truth? What were they so diligently avoiding? That evening, Lily decided to delve into her thoughts. Retreating to her room, she took out a notepad to organize her feelings. Words flowed onto the paper almost on their own. What am I feeling? Why do I feel such a strong connection to him? And why does it scare me so much? Unfortunately, there were no clear answers. She only understood that the dynamic of their relationship had changed, and this was disrupting her inner balance. The next morning, her father suggested they go for a drive together. It had been a long time since they had spent time together outdoors. The weather was favorable, and they set off, the quiet sound of the radio filling the comfortable silence in the car. There was no awkwardness, but a certain anticipation hung in the air, as if something was waiting for the right moment to emerge. "Remember our last trip together?" her father suddenly asked, breaking the silence. The girl immediately recalled the day she was 12, and they had gone to a secluded beach. It had been a simple trip, but filled with bright and joyful memories. She remembered their carefree laughter as waves knocked them off their feet, and how serene everything had seemed then. "Of course, I remember," she replied with a smile. "It was one of the best trips of my life." Her father also smiled, but a shadow of melancholy flickered across his face. "Sometimes I wish I could go back to a time when everything felt simpler." There was more than just nostalgia in his words. It was as if he was confessing something else, something Lily couldn't quite grasp yet. Upon returning home, an unspoken tension lingered in the air. It felt as if something needed to be said, but the right moment never arrived. They seemed to be performing an emotional dance, waiting for one of them to make the first move. Late that evening, as Lily was making tea in the kitchen, her father entered, and their eyes met. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. There were no words, just that inexplicable connection that seemed to grow stronger with each passing day. Questions arose in her mind. Are we truly ready to face this truth? What will it mean for us? And most importantly, are we willing to risk finding out? In that instant, she realized they were on the verge of something that could fundamentally change their lives. But would they have the courage to cross that threshold, or was it better to leave everything as it was, even if it meant living under the weight of the unspoken? The moment their eyes met in the kitchen, Lily realized they had reached a point of no return. It wasn't about spoken words or overt gestures, but about the invisible connection that seemed to pulsate between them. The pull wasn't just palpable, it was almost magnetic. The girl knew changes were coming. But what kind, and why? Deciding to break the prolonged silence, she picked up her cup of tea and turned to her father. "I feel like we don't talk as much as we used to. Do you notice it too?" He looked away for a moment, as if considering how best to reply. When he looked back at her, his eyes held a deep, almost sad thoughtfulness. "Yes, you're right," he replied in a quiet yet meaningful voice. "But perhaps it's just natural changes that happen over time, don't you think?" His words were unexpected. Was it really that simple, a natural evolution of their relationship? Or was there something more beneath the surface, something they were both trying to avoid acknowledging? That night, lying in bed, Lily couldn't sleep. Her mind was overwhelmed with questions and memories that persistently returned. She remembered a quote she had recently read in a university article: "The strongest relationships are those that make us grow, even if they force us to question everything we know." Perhaps that was exactly what was happening to them now. Were they about to grow in ways they couldn't even imagine? The next day, an unexpected event put everything at stake. They were clearing out old things in the attic, a task her father had always postponed but decided to do with his daughter this time. Among boxes of photo albums, they discovered a letter written by Lily's mother. It was a short message, written on paper yellowed with age. Its content was simple, yet devastating. Her mother wrote about the difficulty of her decision, believing she had never truly fit into the life she had built with her daughter and her father. At the end of the letter, she asked for forgiveness but also expressed hope that they could find happiness without her. As they read the letter together, Lily noticed tears streaming down her father's cheeks. She rarely saw him so vulnerable. For a moment, she felt the urge to hug him, to tell him everything would be all right. But she hesitated. Deep down, she understood that this moment was far profounder than any words of comfort could convey. As silence fell like a heavy curtain, his voice was barely audible, a mere whisper. "I wonder, could I have acted differently? Was I capable of more than just meeting her needs?" This sudden vulnerability in his words struck her to the core, as if he had unveiled a part of himself he had meticulously hidden not only from her but from the entire world. "You did everything you could," she replied, trying to find the most accurate and comforting words. "And, frankly, it was more than enough." He looked up at her, and in that moment, she noticed something that had previously escaped her attention. Behind the facade of strength and confidence was a person tormented by doubts, fears, and regrets. And this discovery, strangely enough, made him even more real and authentic in her eyes. That evening, over dinner, their conversation took an unexpected turn. They delved into memories of the past, sharing moments of joy and even recalling difficult times. There was a healing power in those words, as if they helped lighten the burden they both carried. But at the same time, another subtle emotion lingered in the air, hard to describe in words, yet present in every glance, every pause between phrases. It was as if they were rediscovering each other, not just as father and daughter, but as two individuals striving to understand their own complexities and contradictions. In the following days, she immersed herself in reflections on everything that had been said and experienced. Determined to find answers to her questions, she turned to academic works and psychological articles. And this is what she found: family relationships are among the most complex and intricate bonds, as they intertwine love, responsibility, expectations, and, at times, disappointments. One article particularly struck her, stating that true relationships are defined not by social roles but by the ability to see and accept another person as they truly are. Perhaps that was precisely what was happening between them? Were they learning to see each other beyond the familiar roles they had always played? And if so, what did that mean for their future? This new perspective led her to an important realization: change should not be feared, for it can be an opportunity for growth and reevaluation. Yet, despite this, the process of change still felt daunting. Inspired by her reflections, she decided to have an honest conversation with her father. They settled in the living room with cups of coffee and began to talk about their feelings, the changes in their lives, and how they could move forward together. "I just want you to know, no matter what happens, I'll always be here," he said, squeezing her hand tightly. It was a simple yet deeply meaningful moment. In that instant, she understood that despite all the doubts and uncertainties, something remained constant: the love and respect that bound them. But even after all these conversations and reflections, she knew their journey was far from over. For sometimes, the answers they sought weren't in words, but in the moments yet to be experienced. In the following days, time seemed to slow, as if every word, gesture, and even silence paved the way for a realization that, though unexpected, felt necessary. She and her father seemed to rediscover each other, as if they had finally opened the doors to emotions and memories they had previously preferred to keep locked away. That Sunday morning, she woke up feeling that something had changed. The sunlight streaming through the window seemed softer, as if the entire universe knew a new chapter was about to begin. She decided it was time to address all the questions tormenting her, and, even more importantly, to find answers to them. Descending to the living room, she saw her father sitting with a cup of coffee in his hand, gazing out the window. It was an ordinary scene, but at that moment, it seemed extraordinary to her. There was a certain peacefulness in his gaze. The lump in her throat finally found its release. "Dad, we need to talk." He turned to her, and the expression on his face shifted from curiosity to something more serious, almost wary. "About what, Lily?" Before answering, she took a deep breath. "About us. About our feelings. About how our relationship has changed." For a moment, she thought he might try to avoid the topic, but to her surprise, he slowly nodded, as if he had been waiting for this conversation for a long time. "I think you're right. It's time to talk about everything." Thus began the most candid conversation they had ever had. They spoke of their fears and doubts, of how life's changes had forced them to see each other in a new light. He confessed that after her mother's departure, he had dedicated his life to protecting her from the pain he himself had experienced. But in doing so, he had stopped paying attention to himself and his own needs. She, in turn, spoke about how university had changed her perspective on the world, how all her life experiences had shown her that humans are complex and multifaceted. She no longer wanted to remain the daughter he had always known. A part of her was growing, changing, and searching for something she couldn't yet put into words. Throughout this conversation, she understood that the burden they carried was lightening not because they had found all the answers, but because they had finally shared that burden with each other. Concluding their talk, he took her hand and uttered words that would forever be etched in her memory. "The most important thing is your happiness. No matter what path you choose, know that I will always be here." These words resonated deep within her soul, bringing an end to years of tension and opening a new chapter in their relationship, one founded on mutual understanding, acceptance, and boundless love. After this conversation, she felt an extraordinary lightness she hadn't experienced in a long time. It was as if by bravely facing their emotions and resolving old conflicts, they had given their lives permission to move forward. She realized that true courage lay in being vulnerable, opening up to others, and acknowledging that change is an integral part of life's journey. In the end, only the certainty remained that their relationship would never be the same, and that was for the better.